A state of emergency, human rights violations and backing from Donald Trump. We'll examine the future of Egypt. And everything must go. The retail chain reaction that's flooring the world's department stores. I'm Martin Stamford. This is Insight. Welcome to Insight. Egypt is a physical and political bridge between Africa and Asia, but its uncertain future is looking more fragile with a new state of emergency being imposed last weekend. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi announced the measure after attacks on 2 Coptic churches left over 40 dead. Daesh claimed responsibility, adding to the Christian community's sense of vulnerability. Now they're seeking solace and inspiration in a forthcoming visit by Pope Francis, which the Vatican confirmed will go ahead later this month. Insight's Yasmin Khatun Diwan reports.
I just want to let everybody know, in case there was any doubt, that we are very much behind President al-Sisi.
He's just been endorsed by the new leader of the free world. But Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi didn't come to power through a gentle democratic process. Far from it. He sees power in a coup d'etat.
Even if you have an autocrat in power, as long as he can ensure and protect Western interests, i.e. the delivery of oil, and i.e. the protection of Israel, that is, the bottom line.
We seem to be more interested in trade relations than accountability.
The detention of journalists, the imprisonment of activists, and an economy in tatters. Al-Sisi has no economic credential, and critics say his human rights record is abysmal. As Egypt's defense minister and armed forces chief, in 2013, Sisi staged an armed military coup, removing the country's first democratically elected president, Mohamed Morsi, from power. Morsi remains in prison, and his Muslim Brotherhood movement banned. If you're one of Sisi's political opponents, it's a surefire ticket to prison. Tens of thousands of people have been arrested in Egypt's crackdown on what Sisi calls terrorism, but others say is political dissent.
The freedom of expression, the right to demonstrate, the right to associate, the right to protest, free speech in Egypt is non-existent. And I think this is a hallmark of the Sisi regime. Look at the media today in Egypt. They all sing from the same page, as if it was, the notes were prepared in the Ministry of Information and delivered to the desk of producers. No one is speaking out. And Egypt has the record today of being the country with the highest number of journalists in prison.
Security concerns are great in Egypt. This month, over 40 worshippers were killed in 2 church bombings. After the attack, President Sisi declared a 3-month state of emergency and a powerful new anti-terrorism council.
Today, a decision was taken to form a higher committee for combating terrorism and extremism in Egypt.
Among other things, it will wield power over the media, judiciary and religious discourse. It comes at a time where human rights groups continue to raise concerns over flagrant abuses by security forces, including torture, enforced disappearances and extrajudicial executions.
It is a completely authoritarian military state. What we've been seeing over the last 12-18 months is a further deterioration of the situation. It is very, very disturbing in terms of the Sisi administration curtailing human rights on a vast scale and absolutely no accountability.
In 2013, hundreds of Morsi supporters were killed in a single day and thousands jailed. But in contrast to those arrests, allies of former President Hosni Mubarak are gradually being cleared of charges. Fears that the old regime is back have only increased following the former dictator's release. Mubarak was sentenced to life in prison in 2012 for conspiring to murder 239 demonstrators. He was acquitted of all charges last month.
It was inevitable, let's put it this way. He's from the military establishment, and he was never really imprisoned as such. You know, he was in a very cozy, hospital, being treated in a 5-star, if we may say, circumstances. And so it was just a matter of time before the military decided to, give him full freedom, as it were. More importantly, I think, is the fact that he still controls all the wealth, that was stolen from the Egyptian people. Him and his sons and his extended family. All that wealth has not been returned to the Egyptian people. So, despite the bloodshed, the imprisonment, the suffering of the Egyptians over the last 4 or 5 years, the results, are pretty much, zero.
Nowhere is the debate of whether there is justice under Sisi greater than on the streets of Cairo.
I don't understand the terms of the ruling or why he was acquitted. And I'm not going to doubt anyone, but the world is not going the right way. The people who are now jailed were the ones who revolted, and those who the people revolted against have now been released. The whole world is upside down.
We want to kneel down and kiss the shoes of President Hosni. We lived a greatness that we'll never experience again. We had security and everything. We were played to drive this man, and now we're hoping for his return. But you can't bring him back.
Al-Sisi is accused of turning the clock back on a popular uprising that saw thousands turn out onto their streets, leaving Egypt's long history to continue being written, not without a bullet or a blade. Yasmin Khatoun Diwan, reporting for Insight.
Well, to discuss that further, I'm joined in the studio by Jihad Hamid Quazi, who's a researcher and columnist at The New Arab. We'll talk to you in just a moment. Also on a Skype call from London, Omar Ashur, a senior lecturer in security studies and Middle East politics at the University of Exeter. Omar, President Trump praised President al-Sisi, saying he was a great man doing a great job. Is he?
He is definitely not on so many levels, starting from the moral to the ethical to the legal, and finally to the very pragmatic effectiveness of what is he doing. Sisi took over in July to become president of Egypt in July 2014 after a coup in July 2013. And what happened afterwards is that a deterioration primarily on the security situation, whether the rise of an escalation of an insurgency in Sinai, a terror campaign in the Delta, in Cairo, in north of Upper Egypt, and also a limited insurgency in the Western Desert. But also, in addition to that, a deterioration on the economic front in so many levels. Inflation has been at the maximum effect in Egypt ever. But also a series of unprecedented human rights violations, starting from the Rabaa massacre in August 2013, where pretty much over 1,000 people were killed in less than 10 hours. So we're talking 100 Egyptian protesters per hour. And then after that, a wave of unprecedented mass arrests. We're talking today about between 40,000 to 60,000 political prisoners. The minimum end of that estimate, the 40,000, never happened even under Mubarak. Probably 50% of that happened under Mubarak. Also the extrajudicial killings that was going on, we're talking today probably in the low thousands of extrajudicial killings, and probably in the low thousands of disappearances. So that package, security front, political front, economic front, cannot be said as doing a good job. If you're doing a disastrous job, I don't know what would that be compared to what's happening at the moment.
Jihad, the young people who started the Arab Spring all those years ago in various Arab countries, where's their voice in all this?
I think a lot of them are in prisons right now. It doesn't really matter to Sisi if they're Islamists or leftists or liberals. A few weeks ago, it was the 3rd year anniversary of the arrest of Ala Abdel Fattah, who is not an Islamist. So a lot of them are either dead, unfortunately, or in prisons, while Mubarak, who they were protesting against, is now free in his home. It's kind of unfortunate, but I think that the Arab Spring has kind of devolved into a situation where whatever protests may happen now will resemble bread riots rather than protests for freedom and democracy like they were in 2011.
And we know that kind of street protest doesn't end well, does it? Can I ask you, Omar, about the Christian church? Only about 10% of followers, but nevertheless, that's a sizable minority, already feeling persecuted. Now we've had these attacks at the weekend, and yet the Pope is going to Egypt. Is there hope that he might present a bridge to a brighter, more peaceful future?
Well, the problem, maybe it will help on the, let's say, the social psychology and the social resilience level. But in terms of pure security, I don't think it will affect it that much. The situation has been deteriorated primarily because of a pretty bad security, counterterrorism, and counterinsurgency strategy that has been going on. Mainly, the environment is violence engendering on a state level and on a non-state level. And there is no vision among the military and the security hawks who basically believe firmly that the only reason Mubarak was toppled, not because he was a corrupt, brutal dictator, but because he allowed a margin of freedom for the press, for the NGOs, for civil society activists, and that margin of freedom created the civil resistance campaign that toppled him in the end. So their interpretation is that we have to hit even harder on that margin of freedom, and we have to be more and more brutal and more repressive. And their rationale is that if we used, Assad-like tactics or Gaddafi-like tactics, there will be no response, for example, NATO intervention or something of that sort. And of course, President Trump's statements kind of alleviate their concerns in many ways. So that on one end, but also on the other end is that the security strategy that is built on this perception is hit as hard as you can, and you'll get away with any crimes against humanity. It will be forgiven, which will create more problems, I think. And then there is an issue that has been going on in Egypt for the last half of the century, the sectarian dimension, which has been escalating. And that sectarian problem there was no counter strategy to sectarianism in Egypt. It started from the 50s with the Jewish community and then went throughout until today, with other communities, the Christian community, the Baha'i community, the Shia community, and then other communities as well. So there hasn't been a formulation for a policy to alleviate this. And we see, of course, the effects of the repression on one end and the sectarianism on the other.
Omar, thank you. Jihad, what about the external players here? Egypt's neighbours, I suppose, many of them wanting the country to fail. They don't particularly want to see a thriving, healthy, successful economy in Egypt.
I think that it's not that they want it to fail. I think that they see that the maintenance of the status quo will serve their own ends, especially countries in the Gulf like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Mm-hmm. They see that the Egyptian military is a strong ally in regional security.
They prefer that kind of government to be in charge.
Exactly. So they would back it. And like we saw yesterday when the state of emergency was announced, now the issue of the two islands, Tehran and Sanafir, is now in parliament and will kind of become law regardless of the fact that the Egyptian court has shot it down more than once. So I think that the regimes surrounding Egypt would prefer the status quo, and they're not interested in maintaining the economic well-being vis-a-vis like the political situation. So they would rather, support the political system, and the economy would just, whatever happens to it, it's okay.
Well, a gloomy prospect, but thank you for talking to us, Jihad Hamid Kwesi and Omar Ashur as well. Thank you. This is Insight. Coming up next, the death of the department store, how once great high street institutions are failing to compete in the age of the internet.